Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the keynote portion of the Launchpad Jamf Admin Meetup. Today, we are super excited to have Graham Pugh. Now, Graham Pugh developed, among other things, obviously, erase install, which is a very interesting and time-saving script. I won't take anything away from Graham. Graham is the senior systems engineer at Jamf on the MSP Services team, and he'll be presenting on erase install. Graham, I will kick it over to you.
Just going to share my screen. Hopefully the right one, the right slide deck. Okay, so in that case, thanks very much for the introduction and for inviting me to present at the Launchpad Meetup. It's an honor to follow in the footsteps of some of the greats in the Mac admin world that I've seen over the last few months. As you can perhaps tell from my accent, I'm from the UK originally. I spent the last 15 years supporting Apple devices, mostly in the Edu environment, in the UK and then in Switzerland. I've just moved to Germany this year and joined Jamf at the same time. And it's awesome actually to count some of my Mac admin heroes now as colleagues. So it's great. I've given a couple of presentations about erase install before, but since the audience today is most likely Jamf customers in the main, I'm going to concentrate on why and how to use erase install to update and upgrade your Mac fleet using Jamf Pro. So make your screen large, so going into the GUI and stuff. So I do need to touch quickly on the what, for those of you who are not familiar with this project. Erase install. It's a big, long Z shell script that you can download from my GitHub repo. The script orchestrates the use of either Nindigill's Miss CLI tool or the built-in software update fetch full installer command to obtain a full macOS installer application and then runs the installer silently. Since that process of downloading and running the installer can be a long one, I use Bart Reardon's Swift Dialog application to try to provide a good user experience. This allows us to interact with the end user to ask for credentials, warn them if the power is not plugged in, provide progress information, and so on. Slightly more technical, inside each of these macOS install applications, there's a command line binary called startos install. And this has been there since a long time, and I think High Sierra. Well, no, since High Sierra, it's included the erase install option, which you can use to wipe the device and reinstall a vanilla system in a single command. And that's why erase install was called erase install directly from this flag in the startos install option. And that was the original use case for this script in the post-imaging world. But with Apple Silicon in 2020, since then, we've been given the built-in erase assistant application to easily erase all contents and settings. And we've got MDM white workflows that also act as more of a return to service. So the erase option of erase install, it still remains in use by some people in lab situations, or as a fallback when Apple's tools fail, but I would say it's no longer the main use case for the script. Most people are now using it to upgrade or update Mac without that wipe. And this script contains many options for this workflow, which we're going to go into. But let's start with why you would want to use the script to upgrade or update a Mac instead of some other methods. Most of us know or have heard about the challenges facing Mac admins when it comes to keeping the fleet up to date, especially the past few years. Back in the old Intel days, for minor updates, we'd mostly be using the software update command in some form to deploy the updates, either using a script or, this same mechanism was built into Jamf Pro and Monkey and so on. But since the T1 Intel and the T2 Intel Mac, this has started to get less reliable, the more complex operating system that we've had since then, and it's become especially more problematic since the introduction of the Apple Silicon Mac, because then we started to require a user to provide credentials in the GUI. And similarly, for upgrading, like from one major version to another, we used to be able to do that silently with the startos install command. No problem. So we could just have a script in Jamf to do that. But on Apple Silicon, this also requires you to inject the credentials of the user, specifically a volume owner. Apple has been promoting MDM as a supported mechanism for updating and upgrading macOS, but it has proved difficult to get 100% success rate using MDM alone. The recent introduction of declarative device management has improved the reliability and feedback of software updates on Mac, but this is only available to computers that are already on Sonoma. And time's going to tell next week, maybe, if upgrades via DDM will prove as reliable as updates. We've not had that chance to figure that out yet. We've not had that step. But anyway, in the meantime, we need to get those computers up to Sonoma, and we still need to update the minor versions on older computers that are not compatible with Sonoma. And this is where third-party tools such as Nudge, Superman, and Erase Install come into play. Nudge, I'm sure you all know, is a way to nag users to go to the software updates pane and run the updates themselves. On Apple Silicon, any user, whether they're standard or admin, as long as they're a volume owner, can actually do that themselves. Kevin White's been on this very stage to talk about Superman before, an awesome behemoth of a tool for enforcing updates and upgrades, and can do a lot more actually than Erase Install can in its own way. So why are people still using Erase Install? I mean, you can tell me at the end if you like, but I guess it's down to the relative simplicity of setup and use, kind of low barrier to entry. Right, let's dive in. To demonstrate the simplest way to set up Erase Install, I'm going to dive into setting up Erase Install in Jamf Pro. So let's start in the GitHub repo. Go and grab the package from the releases link down the bottom, get the latest one, and we just grab the package. Simple as that. Now we've got the package, go into our Jamf Pro server and upload it. And just a note, Erase Install is just a script. So you can just add the script. We'll talk about that later. But I do recommend using the package because this package contains also the supported versions of Mist and Swift Dialog. So these get pre-installed on the client when you deploy the package. However, if you do use the script directly, it will work without you repackaging those other tools separately. It will download them on demand. So we've got the package. So now I can make a single self-service policy that will download the macOS installer and upgrade the computer all in one go. That's the simplest workflow. It's not the quickest. Come back to that later. Now, since I'm making a self-service policy, I need an icon. So back to the repo, there's an icons folder. All of the recent macOS installer icons are there, plus this generic one, and also one for the erase and install option. So now let's make the self-service policy. Just giving it the name here, upgrade to latest macOS. And I'm just gonna scope it. I'm gonna add the package. And on this simple example, I'll just scope to all computers. It's a self-service policy, so that's kind of okay. And need to do all the bits and bobs for a self-service policy, upload the icon, etc. And once the icon's up, the important part, as well as adding the package, we need to give the run command. So to do that, we'll go into Files and Processes, and what we need in the execute command box is the path to where Erase Install has been installed by the package, which is /library/management/erase install, and the name of the script, which is also eraseinstall.sh. And then we add the parameters or the options that we need. In this case, because I want it to download and reinstall, you can see I'm adding the reinstall flag. I've also added the update flag. This, this is a way of running erase install on a regular basis and caching. If there's an installer cached, which is up to date, then it will just use it. But with the update flag, it will check if there's a newer version available. And if there is, it will replace the existing cached one and download it with the new one. So it just allows that kind of reuse. No further parameters are essential. We'll talk about some others later, but we can move on for now and look at how this looks on the client with just those two options. So I'm in self-service. That's the policy I've just made. You'll see that the first thing that happens is they're immediately asked for credentials. And then it goes back in the background, uses MIST to find out what the latest compatible macOS installer is and starts downloading it. You'll be lucky if it's this fast. I think in this video is about 15 minutes. And once it's downloaded 100%, then we replace that dialog with a full screen dialog for the preparation phase. And again, it shows a progress bar. For some reason on this VM, it kept doing it in kind of steps rather than what I normally see is it goes up to 100. Anyway, regardless, it was working in the background. And once that's finished, the reboot happens immediately. So there's no step for the user to do after they've provided their password. You can see we're now on Sonoma. Okay, so that's the simple end user experience. But let's look at some options you can use to customize that for your own needs. So firstly, we can minimize the disruption for the user even further by using the reboot delay mode. This is an option provided in StartOS install. I'm just sort of porting it over, which delays the reboot after that preparation phase has finished for up to 5 minutes. This is expressed in seconds, so 300 is the maximum. And by using this, we don't need to provide that full screen blocking screen anymore because there's no reason the user can't continue to work here. And then we just give them enough time to save their work. So, you know, whatever you want it to be, 60 or up to 300. So the default in erase install, if you use the reboot delay option, is to just have this utility window. There's an OK button, even they can make it disappear. Once the preparation phase is finished, you get a new dialog, which they cannot dismiss, and that counts down how long they've got to save their work. All right, so second option, the default number of times that someone can enter the password is 5 before it will fail and the script will quit. There's a cancel button also, you can see. So they could just say, I don't want to run this. So there's certain workflows where you might not want that to happen. You can see here we can increase the number of password attempts, but importantly, if you set password attempts to infinite, then the cancel button goes away and it will just keep trying forever and they can't dismiss it. Another one for laptops, add the check power option if you want, and this will not allow it to continue if the power is not plugged in. And you can define a custom power wait limit. The default is 60 seconds. An option that's maybe useful if erase install is being used in a recurring policy as opposed to a self-service policy, the confirm option. This adds an extra user confirmation window that shows up after the download is finished, but before the preparation phase begins. This allows the user to cancel installation, but the downloaded installer remains there on the disk. So next time this policy runs, they'll be already at the preparation phase. But there is a cancel button. That's the whole point of a confirmation window. But some people thought that might be sort of essential in a kind of enforced workflow. And I've been showing dialogues in English, but we've got 7 languages now, just added Japanese recently. Um, that's determined by the language on the device. And brand new, actually, I'm not sure I've pushed this to prod yet. You can now override that if you want, for whatever reason. Useful for my own testing, at least. So if you want to specify that it's in Japanese, you just add the 2-letter code for Japan. And just quick mention some of the things I'm not going to cover anymore. We have, of course, still the erase option. We're talking about reinstalling today. That reinstall means either update or upgrade. With this tool, it's the same because we're using a full installer anyway. And erase will still use the full installer, but it wipes the device before reinstalling. Other than that flag change, everything else acts the same. And also the policies I'm going to be showing you in a minute, they're all concerned with getting to the very latest macOS, but we can be more specific. So if you only want to go to the latest macOS, minor OS version within whatever OS is on the machine, we can use the same OS flag. And if you want to specify the latest version of a particular major OS, use the OS flag. And if you want to specify an actual version, a minor version, a point version, use the version flag. A lot of people mix up the OS and the version one. Version is for a specific OS, is the latest version in that major OS. So we've made a basic policy, seen it working, looked at some of the options that you can customize for the user side of things. Let's now look at some ways we can improve things for the administrator. Firstly, we probably don't want to scope this policy to computers that don't need it, so people don't unnecessarily reinstall their system. Erase install will do that. You can download the same version that is on the machine and reinstall it, which is actually useful in some troubleshooting circumstances. But perhaps you don't want that in Jamf all the time. So we ideally just want to target computers that aren't already on the version we want them to be on. There's a few ways we can do that. One way I thought we'd be able to do it is with patch titles. There is the patch reporting options for Apple macOS, and you can create a smart group that says value latest version. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to scope actions based on latest version. And we get an error, you can't actually save it. In any case, this wouldn't take compatibility of that major OS into account. Let's say we have a machine that the maximum it can go to is Monterey. This kind of scoping wouldn't take that into account, so you'd have to have extra criteria with sort of model identifier, list strings of regex that kind of can identify what is the latest for that machine. So yeah, maybe it's not worth it anyway. Another way is to scope based on check of whether there are any software updates available on that machine that locally. At least that will only report compatible updates. And we can use an extension attribute to read the contents of the software update plist file on disk, specifically this last recommended updates available key. If you have that checkbox in software update that says check for available updates, this file gets updated every 8 hours or so. So that's kind of cool as long as the software update mechanism is working properly. But yeah, we've had problems with that over the last few years. And if you're trying to use DDM for updates, enabling the checkbox, which that checkbox I was talking about, that's enabling the consumer mechanism for checking updates. There's actually, it can actually clash a little bit with the sort of managed update mechanism because the dialogue system is kind of different. So if you're doing deferrals or not deferrals, but the kind of, what's the word for like the number of deferrals that you're allowed to giving the user, this can kind of interfere with each other. I think Apple are saying use one or the other. So if we've turned this off because we're trying to use DDM when we can, then this isn't going to get updated. So if we want to avoid relying on the internal check for software updates, we need some sort of external source. Can't use patch. This has got easier very recently, a few weeks ago, due to a new open source project called SOFA. This is short for Simple Organized Feed for Apple Software Updates. It's a web feed mainly developed by Henry Stammerjohann from Central. I'm sure many of you know of him. And it combines the information from various official Apple sources, including the latest available software updates, and their compatibility with Mac model identifiers. Especially this, there's, as well as the GUI, there's this JSON feed. It contains even more information than the GUI. In this example here, I'm searching for my own machine, and we can see this MacBook Air 10,1 is compatible with OS versions 12, 13, and 14. You can see one further above there, though, is not compatible with 12, for example. So we can use this information in an extension attribute, curl down this JSON feed to determine what is the latest compatible macOS installer that we can get. So because we can do that in an extension attribute, I've got curious and I've actually written one and contributed it to this project. So from the SOFA page, we can click on the GitHub link. And in here, you'll see a folder called Tool Scripts. And in there are various EAs that I've made. And this one we want today is called macOS version check. So we can copy this, go and chuck it in our Jamf Pro server as a new extension attribute. Because we're going to start to be able to scope based on this. So easy, it's a script, we just paste it in. We don't have to edit it at all. That's it, just save that now. So now we can make a smart group with the criterion based on that extension attribute. So we need to find it. Too many. Here we go. And what we have to set here is the word fail. This extension attribute exports just fail or pass. Pass, it is up to date. Fail, it's not. So now I can go back to that self-service policy I made earlier, and I can change the scope so that instead of it going to all computers, we point it only to computers that are in that smart group based on that extension attribute. Good. So now we have a reliable way of determining if the system is up to date, so we can scope appropriately. One thing we do need to take care of, though, is that this does rely on an inventory update. When the machine is restarted, Jamf needs to know that it's now up to date so it can descope this. And one thing about erase install is that if the policy runs successfully, you will not get a recon at the end of the policy because it doesn't ever have the chance to finish, actually. Because StartOS install, its own process is to restart, and that's part of the script. So there's no way, or at least no way I've ever found out, to actually kind of finish the policy before the reboot. So then we need to do this separately. So what we just need is an update inventory of startup policy. So it's just like the one that is in every instance when you create a new Jamf Pro instance, the only difference being that instead of the run once per week schedule, we're setting it to run on startup. That's the only difference. But what we do need to also make sure is that we go into settings and check in and make sure that the startup script is enabled and also the checkbox check for policies triggered by startup. Cool. So now we've got that reliable workflow, including descoping after the upgrade. But we can go further to make the administrators' life easier. Firstly, erase install is on version 34. So there's been actually more than 34 versions. Let's say we need more than one policy in our instance. I think in my last place I had about 5 because some computers need to be upgraded to Monterey or Big Sur or whatever. We had the erase install policy. We had some people who only wanted to download rather than do the upgrade and so on. So you can, you end up with several policies. And if I have to go and replace the package in each one every time, it's getting tedious. I mean, I used auto package for that, but still. 2 ways to avoid this. One is to use the script, as I was talking about earlier, so use the script directly instead of the package. Talk about that in a minute. But the other is to have a separate package installation policy that you call as a trigger from the other policies. And then when there's a new package, you only need to update one. So I'm going to describe that as well. So the script option, recommend if you're going to do this, go to the repo, go to the release branch, grab the script, and we can just copy it, and then we can go into our Jamf Pro instance. And we just need to paste the script in. There are no parameter titles to add or anything like that. So that really is just it. So now we can use the script instead of package in the policy. So going back to our policy again, you can see I've already removed the package and the files and processes. We need to do it differently in this case. We're adding the script. And any of the options for the script need to be put in parameters. In any order, it doesn't matter. You need to add the dash dash, just as if it was in the command. The caveat here being you can only have 8 parameters, and some people want more than 8. So if you need more than 8, don't use this method. And just a reminder that by this method, mist CLI and Swift dialog are not there, but the script will download them at the beginning of its run if it needs them. Okay, so the other way is to create this separate trigger policy. And this is my recommended way. This is the way I do it, just because I prefer to deploy the package. And it scales up pretty well once you have these multiple policies. So let's look at building that. And then I'm going to demonstrate my kind of recommended setup for one-to-one computers with the kind of best user experience, which is to have 2 policies. One caches the installer silently. You can run that on a recurring basis. The user doesn't need to be interrupted while it's happening. And then a second policy that runs erase install to perform the upgrade. Advantage being that because the installer is already there, they don't have to wait for the download phase. So let's build that all up. So first of all, we need that trigger policy. So this is a basic one with the package. We're going to add maintenance, as in update inventory, so that Jamf knows that the package has been installed. And we will scope to all computers. And the important thing, the only trigger is a custom event. Let's call it install erase install. And then let's set the execution frequency to ongoing because this should run every time it's called. Cool. So we've got that policy. And now we can create the additional 2 policies that are going to run erase install. To call the trigger, my recommendation to do this is to use a script in these other ones because we need to download erase install first and then run it. You could put it all in the run processes, the execute command, but that's starting to get a bit messy. And there's one other reason why it's better in a script is that if the policy fails, or if the script fails, the policy will exit the script will exit one and the policy will show as failed in Jamf, whereas in the execute command box, that always exits success, even if the thing inside it actually fails. So better to use a script. I've made an example script in the GitHub repo. It's called erase install launch script example with trigger.sh. And I've just copied it, so we're going to paste that into Jamf. We need an individual script for each different command that we're going to run. So let's paste that in. This is an example, and it has options that I don't want here. This is one for just downloading. So I don't want to specify the OS, and I don't want to reinstall, and I don't want any other options. The only one I want is that update flag so that it will check if there's a newer one available when we run this on a regular cadence. So that script's ready. And so now I can go and add this script to a new policy. Let's start making that. I've already added the title, download latest macOS installer. And this is going to run once a week. Could be once a day, I don't know, but once a week to cache the installer on any computer that's not up to date. So we're adding the script, download latest macOS. No parameters required. We definitely need the maintenance update inventory enabled because we need to know that the installer is on the machine. And we're going to scope to that smart group we made earlier. The macOS is not up to date. This is not a self-service policy, so we're done. Right. For the second policy, we need another script with different parameters in it. So let's just go and clone the first one and change the name to upgrade to latest macOS. And then we can go change the parameters. This time, I don't want the update. I don't want it to check for another one. This will only be run based on the scope that there is an installer already there. I do need the reinstall flag, and I can add any of the kind of optional ones that we talked about earlier, none of which are essential. So I can just keep typing forever. Okay, and for this policy, I need an additional smart group. I need to know if the application has downloaded or not. That's the install macOS Sonoma.app or whatever it is. The way I'm going to do it here is with a smart group that says install macOS application is not present, because I'm going to use it as an exclusion. Thought that was supposed to be video. There we go. Simply application title does not have install macOS. That'll cover all the macOS versions. Okay, so now we need we're effectively replacing that original upgrade to latest macOS policy. And this time I'm making it self-service as it was before. We're going to add the script for upgrading to latest macOS. We can add maintenance purely for the for when the policy might fail. As I said, doesn't do anything for if it succeeds. The target, again, is the group macOS is not up to date. But we need to add the exclusion that the application, the installer application is not there. Cool, that's it. It's a self-service policy, so we do all the self-service things. You've seen all that before. All right, so let's just summarize. That's all you need. Let's summarize what we just built. First, we made the policy that installs the erase install package. It's scoped to all computers and runs only on a trigger. Second, we created the policy that caches the latest compatible macOS installer. This runs once a week on computers that do not have the current macOS version installed that is compatible with that system. And we've determined that with a smart group based on an extension attribute reading information from sofa. Thirdly, we created the policy that installs the latest compatible macOS installer, and this is limited in scope to computers that already have that cached on the machine, and also to machines that don't have the current macOS version. I think I scoped it once per computer here. I didn't really mean to. It can be ongoing. It's a self-service policy. And finally, do not forget this update inventory on startup policy to record that the system is now up to date after it's been upgraded so that that computer will fall out of scope of the other ones. So that's my one-to-one setup recommendation. You can add other policies that for other types of policy if you wanted to restrict it to like say Sonoma, for example, you might add --OS 14 so that when OS 15 comes out, Big Bear or whatever it's called, that doesn't get put on by accident when you're not ready. But the process is the same. Cool. But there's another use case, lab machines. And I always got a lot of questions after Apple Silicon came out when we started needing the passwords to be provided. So we needed that interaction with the user about whether it was possible to perform the upgrade completely silently still. Like on Intel, that was just the way it worked. But now we need to supply credentials in plain text, not particularly secure. So I was always reluctant to add that as an option that people might misuse. But this sort of lab scenario, we're already kind of accepting risk. We've probably got a local admin password that's the same on all of like on a whole suite of computers or something like that. So we're kind of aware of the risk. And so in the end, I relented and added this feature so that could be done on those machines that it's appropriate for. So now we have very insecure mode. With this mode, we supply the credentials of any volume owner using a base64 encoded string. This allows us to skip that initial dialogue. So we can think about running this policy unattended, say overnight on log computers. I think it can run at the login window even. So I try and make this easier. I created a script that's on the repo called set credentials. If you run this, it's going to just ask you to enter a username and password for some local user that is common to all the computers you want to scope this to. It spits out the base64 string, and now we can go into our existing upgrade to macOS script, and we can change the options. You can see here, I got rid of all the kind of user interaction type ones. I have a new one called silent. This gets rid of all of the dialogues. I have added also very insecure mode and the credential string. Okay, so now I can go back to my upgrade to latest macOS policy and make the changes here that I need. I don't want it to be self-service anymore. So I want it to run on a recurring check-in, and let's say we want it to run every day, but let's restrict it to certain hours of the day. So we can do client-side limitations. So for example, here we're saying that it should not run between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m., whatever the appropriate time is for this set of computers. That's one way to do it. You could also restrict it by days, so it only runs at the weekend, something like that. But again, so everything else is the same in this policy, just to say, but again, not recommended for one-to-one computers because we are injecting the password essentially in plain text. So if you're using the same local admin password across your one-to-one computers, I advise you to think again about that workflow. Okay, so erase install, or rather the use of full install macOS applications to update computers is pretty robust, and that's why people are using it. It's the kind of the most successful. It's it's not the sleekest way of doing things, but it's kind of just works the most often. Um, but still, we might need to troubleshoot. So the trick here is knowing which log files to look at, basically, right? So erase install outputs everything into a log file inside the log directory of the erase install working directory. And if you've installed from the package, that's /library/management/erase install. The logs are rotated so that the last 10 runs are represented. So if you're troubleshooting, you don't only get the current one. Note, however, if you are using the cleanup after use option, which, yeah, that's an option that some people use to kind of stop leaving cruft on a machine, but that whole directory is deleted then using a launch daemon after the upgrade, so you would lose the logs. So for troubleshooting, don't add that flag. Inside the erase install log, you see everything that the script is outputting, also the output from Mist CLI tool, and the direct output from StartOS install. But this isn't very verbose. It's basically just like telling you what percentage of progress the preparation phase has made. So for troubleshooting, it's not actually particularly useful. If you've got issues like it's stalling halfway through or timing out or you're not seeing anything at all, you probably want to go into the system install log. So /var/log/install log, and you want to look for this process called OS installer setup D. It's a bit needle in haystack. There's a lot of output, but there's a good chance that the error is in there somewhere. This is just one example from this week that somebody sent asking for help. Bit weird, but the failing message came with the Rosetta update failed to download. Please try again. It's like, what's Rosetta got to do with it? But thinking about it, like if Rosetta's already on a system, the way the upgrade happens is you're using this full installer, which doesn't have Rosetta in it. So Apple has tried to be nice and inject the Rosetta back into it during that update process. But on this system, it's failing for some reason. Went back to the user and they were like, oh yeah, we do have this very strict firewall policy that restricts Rosetta installation except during specific workflows. So that broke the workflow here. 90% of the time, it's something to do with firewalls and network preventing the upgrade from completing. I think some people think that the preparation phase is offline, but it's not. There's like things needed during that process from the internet. For more generic problems, troubleshooting the use of this script, particularly if you're not familiar with all the options, there's --help. Just run this, you get every option. There's a lot. Far too many to talk about today. And there's the wiki, which has most of those options in a more descriptive form. And of course, there is in Slack the erase install channel, where crazily there are 1,800 people waiting to help. All right, so that's kind of all I've prepared today. So I'm hoping that you've taken a few things away from this session. We've gone into a lot of detail about the different ways people are using erase install. We've seen different options for configuring the user experience. We've also seen ways of creating the policies in Jamf to try and minimize the kind of use and improve the scalability, with my recommendations at least. We've integrated erase install with data from SOFA so that we can target policies in a more intelligent way without having to resort to like maintaining regex strings of compatible models and things. And you can also use, by the way, those extension attributes for other purposes, such as scoping MDM software update commands. And finally, we've touched on how to troubleshoot when things go wrong. All right, so if there's still time for questions, we're getting close to the end actually, but feel free to ask now or hit me up in Slack. And with that, thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Graham. That was killer. You went into a ton of detail on that. So I think I probably speak for everyone here with amazing job. Thank you so much for that.
Oh,
Uh,
no worries.
we
And
do
oh
have a
yeah, I want to say dedicate to oh, it's gone. Never mind. I want to dedicate this talk to the Doge who recently passed away, but never mind,
oh,
it's gone.
big
Yeah,
respect.
pour
We
one
have a
out.
ton of dog fans on here. Cheers. Although it's not 9 o'clock where I am. It's a much more appropriate beer hour for you over there, Graham.
It's alcohol free, don't worry.